And welcome to The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues. And this week, we're talking about an issue that has everything to do with Barack Obama and the new administration and how he's going to address the judicial issues.
Yes, we're going to have Professor Michael Scaperlanda join us from the University of Oklahoma College of Law, who's an expert in constitutional law and other related fields that deal with this. He's going to be able to talk to us about what we should expect to see in the way of judicial independence from the other two branches of government under an Obama presidency. But, by the way, happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much.
To you and your family.
Appreciate that.
Happy Thanksgiving to you folks, too.
It's all coming up today on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
Every day America uses clean-burning natural gas instead of coal or oil is a day of victory for our environment. That's why Chesapeake chose to explore for natural gas exclusively, and we've never looked back. Because natural gas burns twice as clean as oil or coal, and reducing carbon emissions to combat potential global warming is every bit as urgent as cutting our dependence on energy imports. As America's #1 driller of new gas wells, Chesapeake is moving fast to find untapped reserves of natural gas here at home. It's the right fuel for America's economy and the fuel for a clean air future. We just happen to be early to see it so clearly. Chesapeake, natural gas wins the day.
Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Today, we're very pleased to have back for another appearance on The Verdict, Professor Michael Scaperlanda, who is the Associate Dean for Scholarship and Research at the University of Oklahoma College of Law. Michael has been at the College of Law since 1989. Prior to that time, he did his undergraduate work and his law work at the University of Texas. He was in private practice both in Texas and Washington, D.C. And as I indicated, in 1989 came to the University of Oklahoma College of Law. There he teaches constitutional law, professional responsibility, and several other courses. He's held in high esteem by the law school, and of course we're thrilled to have him. Michael, welcome back.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you.
We have entitled this show, Judicial Independence in the Obama Era. How do you define judicial independence and what does it mean?
Okay. Yeah, judicial independence is, I think, extremely important, although I want to talk about its limitations mostly. But I just came this weekend. This weekend I was in Dallas studying the trial of Thomas More with about 175 other lawyers and others. And seeing how far we've come with the judiciary over the last almost 500 years. In Thomas More's time, the king appointed a special commission of judges to try him personally, and a trial of Bishop Fisher a couple of weeks before that. Cromwell went in and berated the jury for not deciding and not deciding quickly enough. And so the importance of judicial independence is that in these grave decisions affecting people's lives, that judges be insulated from political power.
Well, we have a series of quotes that we'll be bumping on in between segments on this show talking about judicial independence from Associate Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, now retired, and others. But when we're talking about independence, we're talking about, at least in the federal context, we're talking about independence between the judiciary on the one hand and the executive and legislative branches on the other.
That's correct.
But they're not completely free of influence.
That's right.
How do they work together?
Well, the way the framers, I think, envisioned it was they envisioned an independent judiciary to take care of some of the problems that had occurred, in common law and throughout history in England, to make the process fair, especially in criminal trials, but also in civil trials. But the framers never envisioned a completely independent judiciary. And there was a debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists over the whether the Constitution ought to be adopted. And part of that debate centered on the judiciary. The Anti-Federalists said, look, if we have a life tenure judiciary that's free of influence by the legislative branch or the executive branch, they're going to run amok. They're not going to follow the written Constitution. They're going to just decide on based on whatever they want to decide on, whatever they think is the best policy, their ideology. The Federalists responded, and they didn't say, well, unfortunately, we need that. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's the best we can do. They responded by saying that the Supreme Court would not have the power to run amok because they didn't have the power of the purse and the power of the sword, and that if they started legislating from the bench, if they started being activist, the legislature would slap them down, would stop them, would either impeach them or somehow impede their political progress.
Well, now, I'm sorry.
That's what I was going to say. Well, how often does the legislative group slap them down? Historically, how often has that occurred?
Well, that's been the I think the flaw in the system is that I think both the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists were correct in that the court has engaged in political judicial activism, political opinions, but although Congress has the ability to limit the judiciary in certain ways, they haven't. In fact, when Lincoln tried to do that, or suggested that he would do that after the Dred Scott opinion in the late 1850s, when he was running for Senate in 1858 against Stephen Douglas, Douglas made fun of him for saying that he had authority to, as either senator or president, to limit what the court did. So we haven't.
So even by then, it was kind of assumed that they were to be left alone.
That's right.
But let's discuss this. Let's fall back a little bit and discuss the workings of all three branches in getting a judge put on the federal bench. Now, it starts in the executive branch, I take it.
That's right.
With the appointment by the president.
Appointment by the president.
And then take it on through.
Yeah, and then the president has to take that appointment over to the Senate and ask the Senate's approval. And then once the Senate gives its consent, then the judge is impaneled for life.
And in good behavior.
For good behavior, yes.
But that, in essence, means
that's right.
Life unless you don't behave well.
That's right. And those instances are very few. So.
Yes.
Well, historically, what have been the landmark cases that dealt with judicial independence? I know you mentioned Dred Scott.
Well, yeah, and the cases that I would mark is cases where the court, and there have been others, but cases where the court has acted in a political and not a judicial manner. Dred Scott, where the court basically said that the Constitution was a slave document. The framers had purposely kept slavery as limited in the Constitution as possible. It's clear we had slavery, but I think they left it to us to decide what to do about slavery. In 1857.
So they recognized slavery might be an evolving issue.
That's right.
Okay.
So they were sort of silent on the issue of slavery. In 1857, the U.S. Supreme Court said that slavery, that our Constitution clearly supported slavery, that the federal government had no business even limiting slavery in the territories. So that was, in my view, an activist ideological opinion, which obviously led to a civil war. The next great period where the court, I think, was real activist was in the early part of the 20th century. The Lochner case, Lochner versus New York, is sort of the linchpin of this period. In that case, a unanimous New York legislature, and to get a unanimous legislature of any kind is difficult. I think declaration of war in World War II, there was one dissent. So here we've got a unanimous legislature saying to the people of New York, bakers cannot work more than 60 hours a week. It's a day, we want to support their quality of life. They're limited to 60 hours of work a week. The Supreme Court struck that down, saying that that bakers had a right to contract for as many, constitutional right to contract for as many hours of work as they wanted to. And what I think we've come to realize is that case was really built upon an economic theory of laissez-faire economics, and also a theory of social Darwinism, and not anything that was in the Constitution. The court was imposing its views. More recently, the case of Roe versus Wade. Even if you agreed with it politically, as Dean John Hart Ely did, he was dean at Stanford Law School, was at Yale before that. He wrote an article right after Roe in which he said, this is not only a bad judicial opinion, it's no law at all because it's so terrible, it's not supported by anything. And just as recently as January, when Justice Breyer was here at the law school, he was asked about Roe in a conversation in a reception, and he said, well, we're working to try to put it on good constitutional standing. So even he understands that it's not on good constitutional standing, which leads us to this problem that every election, or many elections, center around what judges are going to be put on the Supreme Court or in the lower courts.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you about what judges can and can't do, particularly in the Supreme Court. Real briefly, I guess the roadmap for any judge in deciding something is, if it's a federal question, is the Constitution or the federal laws and prior federal precedent. Are you saying that in some instances the judges go well beyond that and decide what they think is right without the right result, without regard to what's in the Constitution or the statutes?
That's correct, especially with respect to constitutional. With statutes, if they go too far, Congress can always come back and amend the statute. With the Constitution, it's
a little more problematic.
It's more problematic because with Lincoln losing the argument in our history, and saying that Lincoln's argument was as senator or as president, I take an oath to uphold the Constitution, not what the court says the Constitution is. With losing that argument, or at least at this point in time, when the court decides constitutional issues, it's very difficult to overturn that. You either have to change the court or have a constitutional amendment.
Let's pick it up there when we get back. We'll talk about political response to judicial activism, and especially as it pertains to a new president coming into office. Okay. You're watching The Verdict. We'll be right back.
I remember walking into the academy and seeing the Highway Patrol core values, the professionalism, the courage, the bravery, integrity. And I realized that those are some of the same qualities that I was taught by my grandmother that the Chickasaw Nation valued in their people. We had received calls of heavy, heavy rain. I mean, it was the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen in my life. We had seen the white pickup truck with the two elderly people in it. There was no means of escape. And looking down at these people, you could see the terror in their eyes, and we knew we had to make a move or these people would probably die. And I reached down and grabbed their arm to help pull them up. I remember thinking, these people are gonna live, this is gonna work out. I appreciate this citation, but that's what we do. That's what we're expected to do. I'm glad that I was able to carry on that tradition of bravery and courage under strife.
Home values are down in some states, but not in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's home values have increased 4.2% during the past 12 months. Unlike some states where home values have decreased as much as 20%. Good thing you're in Oklahoma. There may be real estate problems in some states, but there has never been a better time than now to buy or sell a home in Oklahoma. One of the most affordable states in the country, Oklahomans are buying and selling homes every day, and an Oklahoma realtor can show you how. Good thing you're in Oklahoma.
Okiwani is an Indian name for a place where children play. When we obtained the camp, we found a lot of oil debris left in the woods.
We saw a commercial about how the oil and natural gas industry cleans up old oil well sites.
We called the OERB, and they agreed to remove tons of concrete and steel. It didn't cost us a thing.
Thousands of children have left their footprints on this land. Thanks to the oil and gas industry, they will for a long time to come.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett, Kent Myers, and our guest, Michael Scaperlanda, who's here to discuss judicial activism, both in the 21st century and also in the 18th century.
Well, indeed, and let's bring it up to today. To some extent, what should there be in the way of a political response when judicial activism is identified as happening?
Well, it seems to me that, well, I'll put it this way. I like Lincoln's response. Andrew Jackson had the same response, and that is that when the court acts politically, when it can't justify its opinions based upon the Constitution, but we know they're going outside the Constitution, I think that the court ought, or the political branches ought to be a check on the court.
But how practically can they be, other than just by replacing the members as they retire?
Oh, I've got a wonderfully devious plan.
Okay, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Cut back on two things. Cut back on their law clerks.
The purse strings.
The purse strings. But by cutting back on their law clerks, one, they can do less mischief, and two, they're going to get the idea that that Congress isn't happy with them, and maybe they'd come back in line. And then the other purse string issue is their computer budget. You know, as they use 5-year-old computers or 10-year-old computers, maybe they'll get the message that what we want them to do is judge and not be the third political branch.
Almost sounds like we need a fourth branch to keep an eye on the third branch.
Well, I think they just need to keep an eye on each other.
Well, you touched on this earlier, but the framers of the Constitution had a vision for how this judicial activism would be dealt with. What was their vision, and how has it evolved to today?
Well, their vision was, I think, that Congress would, and they really saw impeachment as a method for this, but their vision was that Congress would not take lightly judicial usurpation of Congress's power.
Has there ever been serious discussion about impeaching a judge?
Very early on, and it didn't work very well. The other thing that happened in our history was FDR threatened to pack the court during the New Deal because all of his New Deal legislation was being struck down.
What does pack the court mean?
His idea was for every justice over, I think it was the age 70, he would get to appoint a new judge and just expand the court. That ended up getting defeated in Congress. But Owen Roberts, who was the sort of swing vote, the Kennedy of his time, Justice Kennedy of his time, and Justice Kennedy is the swing vote today. Owen Roberts ended up going with FDR after the court packing plan.
We've had a combination of presidents who had legal backgrounds and those that had non-legal backgrounds. Is there a history of the people with non-legal backgrounds acting differently than those with legal backgrounds?
I don't think so. I think the real question, and it's also not a left or right question either, because judicial activism can be a judicial activism from the right. It can be judicial activism from the left. Lochner was a judicial activism from the right. Most modern judicial activism is from the left. So I think it's less to do with whether you have a legal background, but whether you want to try to get policies adopted that you can't get through legislative action. And so it's a way to circumvent majority rule.
Mm-hmm. I know the American Bar Association has been fairly vocal about judicial independence. Sandra Day O'Connor herself was fairly vocal about it while she was on the court, and more particularly afterwards. What is the American Bar Association's position? Is it that the independence is being interfered with, or needs to be expanded, or needs to be cut down?
Yeah, the American Bar Association, starting in the mid-90s, 97 or so, has had a campaign for judicial independence.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting just to say, we're talking about judicial independence in the federal bench.
Right.
We're not simply talking about the Supreme Court.
That's right.
We're talking about courts of
Right.
appeals judges and district judges as well.
From my sense of it is that the American Bar Association isn't nuanced enough, because there have been instances of infringement on judicial independence, threatening to impeach a judge or talking about that with respect to the way a judge rules in a criminal trial on whether evidence can come in. That seems to me to be a good criticism of the populace. We ought to respect judges who are really trying to do their work as judges. But the American Bar Association doesn't seem to distinguish between those sorts of threats to independence and where the judges are really acting as another branch of the legislative.
Well, historically, when we've had a Republican president replaced with a Democratic president, or vice versa, has there been a complete replacement of the judicial system all the way down the line for appointments?
Well, yeah, first, just to be clear, since these judges serve for life, all the judges that President Bush has appointed over the last 8 years will still be in place.
I see.
But
until they choose not to.
Until they choose, they either die or they resign.
But the U.S., for instance, the U.S. attorneys, would they all be replaced?
Right, and the U.S. attorneys will be replaced. So those are political appointments, and those will be replaced. Judges will stay in line or stay in place as long as they choose. But President Obama will appoint very different judges than President Bush.
Well, how appropriate do you think it is, going back to the spectacle, if you will, of Robert Bork's attempted confirmation many years ago that didn't turn out well for him? How appropriate is it to get that type of introspection into someone when they're a potential appointee to the Supreme Court? Do you think that's appropriate or inappropriate?
Well, I think it's appropriate to really kind of delve into the background of the judges to see whether they're going to be faithful to the Constitution. I happen to think Robert Bork would have been. The majority of the Senate disagreed with my assessment. So I think it's important to delve deeply into the backgrounds of these men and women who are appointed, because they will serve for life in very important positions. There was a nastiness about the Robert Bork hearing that I don't think we've ever recovered from. And I think a lot of the partisanship we see. How
does the American Bar Association come down on these issues?
Well, I think they would prefer some temperance. Is that right, temperance? I don't know if that's the right word. They would. I think they would like us to use more respectful language with respect to
tone
judges.
it down.
Tone it down. That's what I'm looking for.
Well, what choices do we have as a people to deal with this? How can the average citizen watching the show today get involved and do something?
Well, first, I think we have to rethink the learning we got in high school and grade school. Because at least the learning I got in high school and grade school was that it was the court that protected us, and it protected our rights, protected us from bad government, from overreaching by the government. That was not the framers' view. The framers' view was that the structure of our Constitution, or structure of our government, the three branches,
the checks and balances.
The checks and balances, that was where our liberty was really secure. Most of what we call rights are weighing one set of rights against another set of rights. And so, for instance, in the Dred Scott case, if you look at it from a certain perspective, what the court was really doing was protecting the slave owner's rights against society that wanted to take away those rights at the expense, and so protecting the slave owner's rights at the expense of the slave. And so when we talk about the court protecting rights, Roe versus Wade, protecting the rights of a woman against the rights of the unborn.
We just got about 30 seconds left. What do you think is going to happen here in an Obama presidency?
Well, I think President Obama will appoint judges who will take a more liberal interpretation of the Constitution, will govern judge, and I use that loosely, by the spirit of the Constitution, or what they consider the spirit of the Constitution, and not the letter of the Constitution.
All right. Michael Scaperlanda, thank you very much for coming on the show. Very enlightening.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate it, Michael.
Kent and I'll have a final word right after this.
Blankenship has stopped at the line of scrimmage. No gain
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of the verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
We have just completed a show with Michael Scaperlanda on judicial activism.
Yes, it's going to be very interesting to see about how this plays out with the three branches of government, each having a role to play in the selection of judges. Just how that will work together or not is going to be interesting to watch.
We have some website information. If you have a show that you'd like to see on The Verdict, go to our website, theverdict.tv. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next week on The Verdict.
The preceding program was produced exclusively for the Cox Channel.